Hey everyone, it's Shawn. Welcome to another edition of the Best in Events show. Joined today by Tomm Gillies and, of course, my regular co-host Deirdra Watson. We're going to be looking at Tomm's business, what he's seeing. He's in the support roles, which is so seldomly talked about. And Tomm did a Medium article on that and other stuff talking about kind of all the people that have just kind of fallen through the cracks as we've gone through this crisis, the people who haven't gotten the attention. We'll let him talk a little bit about that, get familiar with that. But then we're really going to dive into his business and then also just ideas for the future. We're looking for solutions here on this channel. Our idea is to think bigger and think about opportunities. So we'll kind of open that line of thinking as we go. So I'd like to welcome Tomm on the screen. Tomm, thanks for joining us today. Why don't you tell folks just a little bit about you, your background, and what you're doing, and I guess just kind of give us the overview of what changed in the last couple of months, and then we'll jump into a deeper conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. I appreciate it. Well, I've been in the industry for coming up on 40 years now. I got my start back actually when I was 13 years old. I was working as an intern for a local television station. I grew up on an island off the coast of Massachusetts, Nantucket, and we had our own local TV station. And I worked there for a couple of years and did community theater and just fell in love with I got bitten by the theater bug. So I got my start in theater and went to college. Actually went to college for acting, but always supported myself by doing crew work. And when I got out of college, I sort of dove more into that end of things. I worked in theater, worked in rock and roll, made my way out to LA, worked in film, television, and then discovered corporate events. And that's kind of been my mainstay for the last close to 30 years now.
Yep.
And it's been great. It's been wonderful. I've worked as I started as a stagehand, worked my way up to becoming a lighting designer, and the last 10 plus years have shifted more into doing stage management and technical direction. So
Yep.
sort of worked the gamut, worked all across the spectrum, and it's been a great ride. It's been a lot of fun. I've met and worked with some amazing people, gotten to travel all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past few months, that all just came to a stop, a screeching halt. And, it kind of came to a screeching halt actually even before everything else shut down, I mean, because the whole gatherings of groups of people, that was the first thing they were saying, well, no more than 50 and
Right.
no more than, and then it became no more than 10, which on most of my shows, that's just the crew.
Yeah. And I mean, Deirdra pointed out, first and last, right? So events were kind of the first ones to shut down for safety reasons. People started cutting the budgets, cutting the travel, and not doing the events. And what's looking like, and that events will be the last thing to fully pick back up, right? So that means a much longer period of separation than other areas of endeavor, right, Tomm?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's, the first event, one of the first events of mine that was canceled was actually canceled because almost 2/3 of the audience was coming from China. And it was after the travel ban had been set for China. So they said, okay, well, we can't do it without 2/3 of our audience. And many of them are award winners. The next one was where they went from having a live event in person, and then they were going to go to just purely virtual, and try and still do it. And then when they came out that said no more than 10 people, they were like, well, now we can't even do the virtual event. So that, and it was pretty much over the course of about a week and a half in early March, right before a lot of the shelter in place orders happened, that the dominoes just fell. Bam, 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 bam.
Yeah,
all down.
Deirdra?
Totally true. And what do you see right now, Tomm, happening in your business now that I think we're 103 days for lockdown, or shut down. 103 days in the industry is a long time, and as planners, and we've said this before, as planners, we always have an end date. Here's showtime. The show must go on. The show's always going on. Now, nobody's doing shows. Nobody's doing conferences. I think I just saw that Live Events is looking at reassessing their model, and they just put out an email today on what their different models are going to look like moving forward. So what is your business looking like right now, Tomm?
Right now, very little. I'm in discussions with some of the production companies. So I generally work with either creative producers or staging and production companies directly. And in certain cases, I work directly for some of my clients. I work directly for the end client, and they are all looking at how do we do this virtually, because we're not allowed to do in person. I mean, that's out of the and even if we were, I think that currently there is a lot of skepticism on attendees' part to go to a live in-person event. They don't want to expose themselves. So even if clients or companies were to say, yes, we're going to host this event, I think at least for the next couple months, you're going to have an issue of not a lot of attendees are going to go.
Right.
And so they're looking at how do we do this virtually. And there's a production company here in Dallas that I went up and saw. What they did was they turned their theater into a virtual TV studio. They've got a whole back end setup, and it's actually a really cool setup, and they're using Zoom. But what they're doing is they are getting it set up so each presenter is essentially on their own Zoom call. And then they're able to switch that in, sort of like what you're doing here, Shawn, where you've got people, in different places, and then you've got a Zoom technician, so to speak, who is interfacing and interacting with your presenters. But then you're running it very much like a broadcast television talk show. But the cool part is that they're also able to have people in the studio and keep the social distancing, and have a live person in the studio who could act as your host or as a group, and have some panel discussions. And so they're really just kind of working through a lot of the technical side of things, and learning as we go in terms of, how do we create these hybrid events? How do we incorporate people from remote places? And I think the difficulty there is normally if you're doing a broadcast talk show, you'd have an ENG crew that would be out with your person that you're interviewing. You'd have a producer, you'd have a camera crew, you'd have, all that. Now you've got your interviewee, like we're doing right here, and they're on their laptop, they're at their house, and there's nobody else there. So having that back end channel to be able to talk to them beforehand, they've set up a virtual green room to be able to talk to the presenters, get them all set up, get them counted in, switch over, have the whole conversation. So I think they've really, and this is something that we do really well in our industry. We roll with the punches. We pivot.
We pivot.
Like you said, Deirdra, the show must go on. So we're always at that place of like, on the bleeding edge of technology, on the edge of, what's going to happen next and how do we do this? And we have to figure it out because the show must go on. And so that's what several folks are doing. They're building these virtual studios and working toward having those totally virtual or a hybrid event. And I think the opportunity is there for a few things. One is the professional MCs, professional hosts, to come in as your moderator.
That's right.
And to be able to switch back and forth and and interview this person, then bring this person in and do these presentations and integrate all that. And I think the hybrid event is also the way to go, where you've got a live person in the studio, where you have a little bit more control, and you can have those discussions in person. Still maintain your social distancing, but I think the holy grail of all of this is audience interaction.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and so I think, Deirdra, I'll let you expand on this a little bit, but the goal with people doing virtual events is to get back to something near the experience of a live event. And, what's missing in the virtual event is that ability to pop in, those informal discussions, kind of the ad lib part of it that just naturally will happen at a live event. And it's harder to recreate that in the virtual side. Deirdra?
Yeah. And one thing that with the virtual events, and the hybrid events, what do you suggest a planner? How do they look at doing those virtual events? I mean, that's all we're talking about, virtual events and the eventuality of hybrid events. And right now, and my background is theater as well. And I ended up going to school for tech theater because the acting program was full, but that's another story. And I've always been around the tech world. And we've been thrown into a technology that most people were kind of like, yeah, I don't have to use it, don't have to do this. But now, corporations are thrown into this virtual world if they want to stay connected right now to their clients, their users. And so what do you recommend that the suggestion be to planners or, corporations on, how to do both, how to engage and work with, a team? Like you said, it's really great that these guys have got, a Zoom ENT or, a Zoom guy. And my biggest thing would be, if you're planning an event, making sure everybody can have a green screen so that you can plug in that virtual background so that the consistency is there. So what are your suggestions in regards to that production side?
Well, and that's the perfect example is, and Deirdra, you and I had talked last week about, some of the stuff that I've done on the side, or, I guess instead of, I've had a couple of clients, and the one, for instance, the event that had to cancel because the majority of their award winners were coming from China, so they couldn't get into the country. We ended up doing a virtual awards ceremony. And as a stage manager, I often do a lot of the voiceovers for my clients. So what we did, they hired me to do a voiceover of all of the award winners. They sent me the PowerPoint. We took that PowerPoint. They sent me a script. We recorded the voiceover and put that together with the PowerPoint into a video format. I edited it all together and then sent them off a video, which then they were able to use during their virtual event as the award portion of the show. So for them, it was, it became a great opportunity to have it feel like a live event, because you've got this announcer voice, you've got music in the background, you've got, award winners names up on the screen, etc. The only difference being they're not coming up onto stage. I just did another one of those this past week that yesterday, I believe, was the presentation. The difference, though, was that one of those was an actual webcast. The other one was a Zoom meeting. And with both of them, the feedback I heard from the producers and in regards to how it went was, because it was being done either on, via Zoom, or it was done as just a webcast internally, it lost some of that professionalism. There were some technical issues. So what I'm suggesting to my clients and, the producers I work with and the planners is, get in touch with your production, your staging companies that you're used to working with, because many of them are, putting together these studios, putting together a back room, control room, where they can have multiple Zoom sources or, other types of virtual meeting space. Zoom is great, WebEx, all the various conferences, virtual meeting conference call things that we use, and we use those all the time in pre-planning. There's so many of them now, and there's probably even more that have come out. The difference with that and a meeting is the control, needing to have that control over what you're putting out there. and also having it so that it's seamless to the audience. And by doing it as a Zoom call, you got to try and mute everybody. You got to make sure this is working. You got to try and that. If you've got a production company that's already preset with this and has control over that and is switching who is live and who's not, sort of like what you're doing here, Shawn, you have so much more control.
That's right.
And it comes across as a more seamless show. It works a lot better. Your quality is much better. And again, like I said earlier, I think there's a great opportunity for professional MCs and hosts to be those moderators. So that's what I'm suggesting to the producers I work with is, contact your staging companies, your production companies, see what they've put together for virtual events. Contact those MCs and that you've worked with in the past. See what their availability is. And it's not going to be identical to a broadcast news show or a broadcast talk show because it is all going to be web-based, but it's going to be very similar. And the hybrid events, I think, are great because then you can send a small crew with a control room, or in this case, almost a virtual truck, to a location and set up several stages in a ballroom at a venue. Not, even have a small live audience, and you can do your same show at that level and still reach all the people. And then also look into the various ARS systems, audience response systems. There are several web-based ones, how you can get that audience engagement versus just having, like the chat that you have in Zoom.
Right. There's the polling and everything like that. That's right.
And if you integrate all of that together, you're not going to be able to recreate the actual live event, but you're going to get really, really close. And I think that's the goal.
Well, I think, a lot of people, at least on the basic ones, you do a Zoom call or whatever, people associate it with the problems, right? They're expecting the muting, some random person's got something going on in the background and the fans flying around or whatever, and everybody's distracted. So, I think your point is there's a whole nother level of professionalism that's available there that, if you have the right conference in the event, it's worth putting thought into how do you produce things. And I got to imagine, Tomm, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but, just using some camera cut-ins and cutouts and a little bit of sound technology in between can make a big difference in keeping your audience energy up and building the experience.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I didn't work this event, but I know one of the production companies I work with, they did a virtual event. It was a hybrid, so they went down to the place to do it. And they had 120 video rolls a day.
Wow,
some
that's
were
huge.
20 seconds long, some were 11, doing these little interstitials, these little commercials in between. But I think that's a great point in that the difference between live events and this new virtual way, and like I said, a lot we can take from broadcast TV, broadcast talk shows is, dead air on stage is bad. Dead air on TV is
Even
10
worse.
times worse.
I think it's the biggest thing in all of this, because I also have a background from television, is the fact that having somebody to, it's almost like, Shawn's doing like camera 1, Deirdra, camera 2, Tomm, and having somebody that can move that. And you talk about the music and everything else. One of the memes that I did was that at the end of every Zoom call, they should play the Oscar fade out music.
Right.
Because there's no end, right? There's no end.
There's no beginning either. It's like,
That's
a lot of Zoom calls, you sit there and you wait, and then finally somebody's like, all right, I think we got enough people, let's start. It's not really a big buildup for, if you're thinking about it in terms of an event or audience impact, right? I mean, a lot of times we lose a lot just because, that's the way the technology works, unless you have kind of that professional part that Tomm's pointing out.
Well, and one of my clients actually put together and they sent out to some of their clients and to me as well, was a mouse pad of Zoom call bingo with all the great, just comments you hear, like, You put a mark down for, child or animal noises. Excuse me, so and so, you're still sharing. Hello, can we take this offline? I mean, there's just some really great, funny comments on here.
Exactly.
And everybody understands that. And when you've got a production company that can then be your back room, your control room, that can mitigate a lot of that stuff,
right,
that can put up the cool backgrounds, that can have, switch over the multi-screens, and not to take away from what you're doing, Shawn, here, but then you as the host, you don't have to worry about switching which camera's on, who's doing what. There's a person in the back that's doing that, just like you have on a regular show. There's an audio person, there's a video playback person, there's a graphics person. There's a team of people that are there to support the meeting. So your host can be the host, your interviewees or your presenters can just focus, just like they do on a live event. They can focus on being the best they can be in that moment, presenting their material, and your audience is engaged. They can sit back, they can watch, and then if you add in that ARS, especially with the web-based stuff, if you set up a web page that has has your video call, but also has that web-based ARS, you can exchange information with your audience in a still controlled environment where they feel engaged, they feel connected, and things are continually moving, and you don't have those awkward pauses. That's where a good production team in the background can be very helpful.
Yeah, and I get that, because I mean, even here, people, there's no secret here when I'm doing the show, right? I'm clicking buttons and I'm prepping and I'm popping it up as best as I can. It doesn't cut quite right sometimes. It's not the same experience as if you had a professional crew in the background. Folks would love to hear what your experience has been with this. Have you seen some really good events? Are you exploring these type of technologies? Drop us a comment, let us know. And of course, if you're getting value from the show, hit the like button. Let us know you're out there and you're enjoying it. And of course, I hope you're subscribed to the Best in Events YouTube channel. Deirdra, let me pass it back to you for the next question.
Yeah, Tomm, in March, you wrote an article for medium.com, which is how I connected with you, because it was a great article on the invisible ones in the COVID-19 pandemic. It's not what you think. And I was totally taken by that article, because everybody forgets about the people backstage. They forget that to pull together an event, a show, whatever, it takes this team backstage. Can you speak to that article a little bit for us and kind of expand on your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started writing the article, and it was mid-March, and it came to me. It started when I lost 4 shows in a row, back to back to back to back. Just the dominoes just really fell, and I realized as that was happening, and then the stay-at-home orders were coming out. It just hit me. It was like, when for years people say, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I said, "Well, I have one of those jobs where if I do my job right, no one knows I exist."
Yep.
And it struck me as all these shows started falling apart and people started talking, there was a conversation about, South by Southwest got canceled.
Yep.
And there were a couple articles about that. And then, they started talking about this concert that got canceled or this, but all of it was from the perspective of the audience.
Yeah.
And it really struck me. It was like, we truly are invisible. If we do our job correctly, nobody knows we're there. And I think back to a job I did in New York City, might have been last year or the year before. It was a launch for a new phone from a company, and they had one of the presenters was a guy from National Geographic, and he was coming out to talk about the camera on this phone. And he walked backstage. I was stage managing, so I was at front of house, but I heard about it afterwards. He walked backstage and his jaw hit the floor because there were 45 people backstage doing various jobs. And he just stopped and turned to the person walking back there and said, "Oh my God, I never knew it took this many people to do this." And the person looked at him and said, "We have another 10 out front as well." And that's the thing is, and on that show, on show day, it wasn't just the 45 people backstage, the 10 people out front. Once the presentation was done, we had a couple of areas where it was it was almost a trade show type event, and they opened up these curtains right at the end of our show. So we had guys that were running those motors for the trusses to release the curtains and turn the lights on over the trade show portion. So there were another 15 people that weren't even involved in the general session presentation part. So you're talking 60 to 70 people for one event. For one thing, and nobody knew anything about them. And so that's what really kind of struck me, was just that idea of, people are going to talk about concerts going away, and they're going to talk about this, but they're all talking about it from the standpoint of the customer experience, the audience.
Yeah, but you're right. There's a lot of people behind the scenes. It's actually a very big industry. A lot of dollars are spent in meetings and getting them right. And, and there's a lot of people that are employed by it. And like Deirdra mentions, it's a long cycle, because out early, in late. So, you're going to get more impact than even, say, a restaurant worker or a restaurant manager, because this is a longer period potentially of disruption to your job. Yeah, Tom, shifting gears. We talked a lot about the technology and how it can improve the experience and how it can make it really better. What would you say to that meeting planner that's watching, because that's kind of a lot of our core audience is people that are running events and helping people with events. What would you say to them if they're trying to convince the C-suite or a decision maker to really kick things up to the next level? What do you think the things that would be critical in that analysis or that discussion?
Well, like I said earlier, I think, again, just going back to the people that have been there to support you in the live event industry all along, from experience, you've thrown, we've all had so many curveballs thrown at us on show site. 30 minutes before we're about to do the show, all of a sudden, hey, they want to change up the PowerPoint deck, or they want to, the big change to this. Oh, we're flip-flopping this. I mean, in the middle of the show, I've had a CEO say, so we're going to pause for a moment where we were going to do this thing, but now we're going to jump to this other thing, and we're going to move over here and switch this around. I mean, on stage, that's happening. And of course, people in the back are all scrambling, and we're on headset going, okay, we got to move this, get this, turn that over, put this up there, do the, and thankfully that particular CEO, he paused for a moment, looked at the audience, and he kind of pointed backstage. He goes, they're all freaking out back there right now because I just threw them a massive curveball.
Exactly.
But the thing was,
your point is, it happens in a live event, right? Because sometimes, you have a speaker that doesn't show up, or, somebody gets delayed, or a meeting runs too long. You've got to shift on the fly. It happens in a live event. It's going to happen occasionally in a virtual event too, right? And you need somebody there to deal with that.
Yep, absolutely. And so that's why when I'm saying, to the meeting planners, to the C-level execs, to the people that are, even the internal folks within the in the corporations that are meeting event planners, trust the team that you've trusted before, that we're going to be able to roll with these new punches. We're going to be able to shift and give you what you need and what you want, and trust those professionals to have your back, to know and or to learn very quickly and shift how to do what we're going to do. So I think that's the big thing is trust the people that you've been trusting for decades to do this. Know that we are always prepared to change on the fly. I mean, I had one last year, back in January, the night before the big opening. They came in, they were looking at stuff. They didn't like part of the opening video, and they changed everything up. And we're in the middle of trying to do a tech rehearsal of it, and then they come to me and go, so here's the new video, and they want to come see this, and and I turned to the video guy. I said, I just have one question. Does my video playback guy have a version of that?
Yeah, and that's something you have to deal with all the time. I did an event a number of years ago, and because I do smaller events, I generally do all the badge printing and everything myself. But I usually have a couple of days before to do it. One event, it was 8 o'clock the night before the event that I got the approval for the badges.
Mm.
So I had to do 300 double-sided badges for 6 a.m. on-site call.
Wow.
Sounds about right.
Needless to say, and I'm sure, Tom, you've gone through this, no sleep the night before. So it's what we do in the industry. We do what has to get done in order to wow the client.
Right.
And that's the whole thing is we look at wowing the client no matter what we do. And I know one of the things you and I talked about in our pre-call was the bringing people back together, the importance of the face-to-face, the connections that people make when they're at events, and even the connections that you're making with your own staff, or the people that you work with behind the scenes. Can you speak a little bit, as a supplier, what do you suggest planners do in order to think about bringing people back together?
Well, I think, and I do remember you and I talking about that, and it's extremely important. And this is not even from a business standpoint. This is from a human standpoint.
Yeah.
Connecting with other people, physically being in the same space. I went up last week to look at the studio of one of the production companies I work with, and we actually set up an opportunity for me to show call a virtual event. And I actually was in a cubicle in their offices, not even in the control room, looking at a multi-view and walking through all that. And we talked about different things, et cetera. And, by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we were pretty much done with everything we had come up to do. But I didn't leave until 4 p.m. just because hanging out with people that I work with on a regular basis, getting to talk to them face to face, and having that interaction, you can't replicate that. It's just not possible. Even, as great as technology is, as wonderful as all of the advances that we've had, you cannot replicate that face-to-face time.
Yeah.
But you can still do it, and do it, safely. And, smaller, like I said, those hybrid events where you can set up several virtual stages in a ballroom, have a smaller audience that's there, that can social distance, that can still interact together. The importance of that, especially I would say for the internal meetings,
Right.
The big sales conference, or the big types of conferences where you've got a lot of the general public going to, that's going to be a little harder. But as far as those face-to-face internal meetings for companies, I think those are possible. And still being able to be socially distancing, to be able to be safe, and do not everyone all together, but doing a hybrid event, I think, is really a way to do that. The good news is, I know that CES particularly has announced that they are planning to do in-person full-on show next January, 2021. And I think, the more of the larger corporations, larger companies, the Facebooks, the Googles, the, Cisco, some of those other ones, once they start doing some form of live in-person event, I think that will generate opportunities for others to fall in line. But I do think the hybrid event, with a smaller audience, socially distancing, a host, some remote presenters, but being able to do that, those are certainly possible, and something we could start looking to do this fall or sooner.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've talked about is the regional events, and actually the way you're talking about them would be perfect, because you have one central place, but then you've got all of these other little hybrid studios where people, or event spaces where people can actually go to enjoy that the conference, as well as the face-to-face and the networking.
Yeah, and you can do that with multiple sites. I did a show last year where we did 3 weeks in a row and 3 different cities, but I was in 3 different cities, but in each week, the first week, there were 8 cities. There was one main presenter who was in one place, and via satellite. We had a presenter, so we were one of the broadcast sites. There was another broadcast site, and there were lots of just reception sites, but they all had about 100 to 125-ish local regional attendees at each site. And over the course of the 3 weeks, we hit 25 different cities overall.
Yeah.
Or close to. And we even had one that was down in Mexico. So it was, there was one international, and we kind of did the West Coast 1 week and then the East Coast and various places. And so, yeah, those kinds of smaller meetings, then you can add that hybrid portion to where you can use satellite, but you could also use internet, and having a control room that could bring different people in virtually, and then you can have the local folks regionally have that physical time and get that interaction.
Folks, we're sure glad you're here. We're hoping you're subscribing to the Best in Events show. Tomm, you've been amazing. You've provided a lot of information. If people want to get in touch with you, they want to tap into your expertise, maybe planning their next event, how do they reach out to and find you?
So my email is tomm at Seeking Productions. That's SEEKING Productions.com. And they can also visit our website, which is www.seekingproductions.com.
Thank you. Thank you, Tomm. You've been just a wealth of knowledge. You've opened up a lot of ideas for myself, and I'm sure for the audience members. Make sure you reach out to Tomm, like the show, ring the bell for subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and join us again for another Best in Events show. We usually film a couple days a week at 2 p.m. Eastern, so be looking at your YouTube feed and come join us for another live show. And, of course, comment and reach out to us and let us know how we can help you with future content. Tomm, thanks for being an amazing guest, and thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yep, it was wonderful.